So we're here today to look at South of the Circle. It's an Apple Arcade game. That means it's available on all iOS devices, Apple TV, iPhones, iPads. And looking at it, you can see how beautiful it is. And we've got John Lau, creative producer on the project, to talk us through what we're seeing and give us a taste of what the game entails. So, I mean, when you're talking about this game, to friends and family, how do you describe what you're doing here?
Sure. Well, I think South of the Circle's like very briefly described as a narrative adventure game, but I think it's kind of very much in the vein of the kinds of dramas that you'd be more used to seeing on television or Netflix, because you've got the full motion captured actors and you've got you've got those camera angles. I think that's kind of that makes it more palatable, I think, to a non-game playing audience, which hopefully will kind of lower their defenses or rather like make them a bit more receptive to like the themes that are kind of being conveyed.
Is there like a takeaway that you feel like what would you tell someone as you're kind of lending it to them, like you'd lend them a good book?
I'd like them to come away from this game having been more thoughtful about things like structural power, about masculinity, about the ways in which their emotional responses might register, and the ways in which like being impulsive with your responses might have an effect on the people around you.
Are you all right?
Yes, sorry.
I didn't mean to pry.
Oh my goodness, you're soaked. Where's your jacket?
You have to make choices and solve problems, and I think there is a very particular way that you empathize with a protagonist in a story if you have to solve their problems for them and you have to make their choices for them. And so there is that aspect of choice in South of the Circle. There is a choice that the player character needs to make towards the end of the game that is closely connected with all of the themes and all of the emotional content of what that person's been going through up until that point. And I think I'm looking forward to seeing how players who have been trained, I suppose, to think in a particular way over the course of the game's design decisions up until that point in the game react to that choice.
I think once they hear like I remember in the trailer there's that you can't change the past, but we can learn from it, and we can fool ourselves into remembering it too kindly. That as soon as you hear something like that and you've got a character in the game saying it and it's in a context and you're like, oh, I can go and talk to him about that, I can go and poke him about why did he say that, I think suddenly it draws people in a way they're not expecting.
Yeah, and that's really nice to hear. I think the other thing I'd say about South of the Circle is that we're kind of trying to be slightly different in quite a few different ways. We're trying this dialogue mechanic. We're trying an art style that we haven't really seen before. We're trying a new attitude towards dialogue in scenes where we're not cutting away from the characters at all. It's just one long continuous scene.
Yeah, it reminded me. I remember saying this before. It reminded me of The Wire. Very different emotional territory, but it's just like it felt very filmic. It didn't just do some driving stuff or some talking stuff just to get the plot points. It was like, oh, this is really recreating, and it stayed and it stayed and it stayed, and it kind of kept it in the wide.
I am absolutely. I'm absolutely delighted that the comparisons to The Wire has been made. I think it's somewhat misleading.
I've been thinking about it quite a bit too.
You have? About my paper?
Yes.
To tell you the truth, I'm rather stuck.
I gathered.
Could you finish it for me, do you think?
I thought you could handle it.
I can.
Well, it's a beautiful idea. I think that's why it stuck with me.
It means a lot that it did.
It would be like having a superpower.
But yeah. I think, because in our previous conversation, Andy, I think you mentioned The Wire because we were talking about power. And I think it was, I remember you saying that because I was thinking about it later on, and we were talking about, I think I said something about structural power, right? And how there are a few things that are hinted at in the story that kind of talk about structural power, the way in which male structural power is kind of wielded unknowingly very often, and the different ways that plays out, whether that's kind of because your government is trying to mobilize your patriotism, or your father is trying to get you to grow a backbone, in inverted commas, or whether it's because you're being professionally ambitious. And I think this is a story that touches on a few of those things in quite a light way, but those references are still very much there, and so hopefully in a way that maybe isn't as in depth or in as comprehensive or even as hard hitting as something like a Baltimore police drama. Hopefully it will be the kind of experience that bears a critical reading and that can generate conversation.
Watch this.
Good grief, what are you doing?
As you said, courting.
Are you now? Go on then, prove yourself, army man. Well now, maybe I had you all wrong. But you really don't need to prove anything.
That's it, my lad. Only another 5 of them. We'll make a soldier of you yet, Pete, my boy.
People always talk about the Citizen Kane of games, and actually I'm interested in like the Sopranos of games.
Yeah.
Where like people recognized that TV was a valuable and important cultural force before the Sopranos. You needed a show or an example of television that really utilized the medium and allowed you to spend time with characters and to allowed you to sit and think and mull over what was going on. Games have been around as a kind of commercial force, or they've certainly been in mass culture for like going on 40 years now, right? And I think, and I'm actually interested to take your take on this, because I think one of the things that's hampering that artistic development of games is the way that discourse is continually focused on games as products, right? Like a review is a purchasing recommendation, and there's an extent to which any review you have to be on the side of the consumer of that piece of culture rather than the creator. But like reviews are very often broken down into like, here's a laundry list of features, and I understand that if all of these things are in and they're properly implemented, then it's worth my $60 or whatever. And actually, what that means is that people always describe what you can do in games and not how games make you feel. And I think it's the latter that really, discussions and conversations around the latter is what will bring games fully into the cultural kind of consciousness.
I've done some writing about this, and I'll often talk about a scenario where you've got two people standing in front of a painting and just absolutely in awe of this painting and talking to each other about it in the gallery or something, and one's like, have you seen this? This is amazing, it's so moving, I just feel like I could stand here all day, it's got to be a 7.5. And the other one's like, no, don't be ridiculous, it's a 7.6, and it's like, that is ridiculous, but that is pretty close to what we do about games. You get,
right.
We try and say the things that they are art and all that, but then we still want to say, but we can score them and rank them, and the game of the year will be coming up too.
Right.
And it just feels so counterproductive.
100%.
Really.
They're very loud voices, even within the discourse, that actively prevent people from talking about games in any other way apart from like 7.5, right? And you need that kind of a conversation to happen about culture in order to make it culture.
The danger is that games become synonymous with a very sort of narrow perspective. They're just power fantasies. And
Right.
the other thing I usually say is that I don't read graphic novels, and I really should, but I completely write them off sort of subconsciously, because I say I don't like superheroes, so I'm not into graphic novels, which is what a ridiculous thing to say, because they obviously could be about anything, and they're a hugely powerful way to communicate, and I like that kind of thing. but I don't ever go there because for me, and I think for culture at large, they have been pretty much become synonymous with a younger audience and with superheroes and sort of fantasy stuff. And I think games are in danger of doing that, and some of the discourse that we're talking about, the danger is that it will fall into that. But I think I'm quite hopeful. I think as games get into the hands of more and more people, and South of the Circle is an example of that. It's a game that can be picked up by mums and dads and grandparents and aunties or whoever. And I think as kind of that gets out, then naturally it'll get caught up as they're talking about The Wire or whatever it is. They'll talk about the game they've played. As they're talking about what's been happening in EastEnders, they're like, oh, I've just played this game, it reminded me of that, and it will become sort of part of that conversation. That's my hope, but I've been saying that since 2012, so it's still getting there slowly. But
I'd like to add my hope to yours, Andy. I think no one, I don't think anyone really has a right to say what culture should be, right? I don't think anyone can really help themselves to a claim like that in any medium, whether that's literature or film, or games. I think the only thing you can ever really say is this is what this aspect of culture could be. This is something that things could be like, and this is one take on it. We are all just tributaries feeding into the broader ocean of expression in culture, and I think that's kind of what South of the Circle is saying. This is something that this medium could be.